Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. What was your, this person's a psychopath moment that you had with a stranger? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I was walking my dog down a main road on lead. A lady was walking her dog off lead. Her dog stopped in the road, causing cars to stop. She had no control of it. Her dog lunged for my dog. I asked her to put her dog on a lead. She said she will stamp on my dog's head and let her dog kill mine. I knew it wasn't even worth arguing with crazy, so I carried on my walk. She then set her house on fire 2 weeks later with her children inside. Luckily, they were okay, but yeah, madness. It was an Uber driver. My wife and I took an Uber down to the bars one weekend. Once he picked us up, I could easily tell he was on something. While we were crossing a bridge on the interstate, about halfway to our destination, he said, "Isn't it crazy that I could swerve off the road and kill us all right now?" I told him to get off at the next exit and canceled the ride. I also reported him to Uber, so hopefully nobody has to get in a car with that lunatic again. This story makes me angry. So one time a friend came over and brought a new friend with him. He seemed like a nice guy. He was quiet and kept to himself. I was a young single woman and far too trusting of people at the time, I think. So my friend mentions that this guy just recently got out of prison. I ask him what he went away for. He then proceeds to tell me that he and his friends had followed a young girl into a local park and armed her using various sharp objects they found on the ground. They each got extremely long sentences. His happened to be 12 years. What made everything worse was that he ends the story with the fact that she killed herself because she couldn't live with what they did to her. Needless to say, he was never allowed around my home again, and I had very stern talk with my so-called friend. Edit, just to clarify. The guy friend, I got rid of him quick sticks, but I felt unsafe and had to do so over a short period of time. The fact that he was associated with such scum and that I was a young lady living alone at the time was the reason he only got a stern talking to. I was chatting away with a guy in a pub. He seemed like a normal, nice dude and got on really well. At some point in the conversation, he casually mentions that he's not long out of jail for torturing a guy. He never said torturing. He said what it was he did to him. He slipped it into the conversation so casually as if he were telling me about running to the shop for a pint of milk. I never saw it coming. He asked around another day and confirmed he wasn't full of shit. A kid went to primary school invited me to his house after school one day. Not many people talked to him because it was a private school, and he was only a student there because his dad was a groundskeeper. I didn't want to go, but I didn't want to be a dick like everyone else, so I said yes, but I couldn't stay long. We went behind his house, and there were several bare spots in the grass. Some of them had a single stick sticking up in the middle, while others had a thin plastic tube poking out. He was very excited as he started digging up one of the spots with a hose poking out. He pulled up a jar with a dead baby bird in it. The hose was poked through a hole in the lid to let air in. He went on to tell me he likes burying things alive. Sometimes he seals them in a jar tight. Sometimes he gives an air hose and even puts a little food and water in to keep them alive longer. He said you can't bury them too deep or you can't hear them trying to escape. Occasionally, he would pour water onto the tubes to drown the animal. I was 8 to 10 years old at the time. I'm 52 now, and it still makes me sick to think about. What kind of young serial killer behavior is that? And I'm assuming the parents knew about the stuff in the backyard. Weird. Went on a date once, and she casually dropped how she killed her brother's hamster with perfume as a kid because she was mad at him. Like it was just a quirky little story to laugh about. Needless to say, I started looking for an exit strategy at that point. At a party in high school, or just after it, we were doing late-night juvenile things like Truth or Dare. I knew most people there pretty well, except my new boyfriend of my friend's sister. I'm not entirely certain how it came up, but he admitted to the entire group that he had SA'd a dog. We were drunk and high, but everyone sobered up after that. We were too young to know what to do with that information, but we all just shut up and quickly left the party. She broke up with him not long after. I can't imagine doing something that awful and helpless, but admitting to a group of strangers seemed downright sociopathic. I was glad to never see his face again. After moving to a new city a few years ago, my best friend came to visit. We're both 30-something dudes. We were out at a bar when a guy asked to sit with us because there weren't any free tables outside. Fine. Being polite, we start talking to the guy. He told us he was a truck driver just stopping overnight in town, and at some point he mentioned he was ex-military. From there, things began to get strange, but slowly, like the proverbial frog in water being brought to a boil. Not only was he in the military, but he had a brother, it might have been a twin, I can't recall, who was in the CIA embedded in Russia. My friend and I also gradually got the sense that this guy was a little too interested in us. We eventually closed our tabs and decided to go to a different bar, but the guy stuck with us, telling increasingly tall tales about the military time he had. He eventually confessed that there were no brother, he was a spy who had been embedded in Russia. What struck me was how, even though he has stories more and more ridiculous, his demeanor was deadly serious, if a bit overwrought, and the intensity was starting to make my skin crawl. Not only that, but he was starting to pick fights with other people at the bar, deliberately being belligerent. Over time, he started to radiate the menacing air that he hadn't been apparent when we first started talking to him. He didn't get angry directly at us, but it was like he was demonstrating how scary he could be and suggesting we stay on his good side. Finally, he took me aside and slipped into a not very convincing Russian accent. Also, he never was a spy for the United States. He was a double agent, one-man Russian sleeper cell. But he couldn't bear lying to me. He had to come clean. Even though we had open tabs and at the bar, my friend and I waited until the guy went to the bathroom and abandoned our cards and dipped post-haste. I, 20 female, was dating this dude, 23 male, for a few months, and we were getting along really well. But then we both ended up having to move for our jobs at around the same time. He wants to try and long distance, so we do. We call most days and watch movies together in our free time. Then, when time zones mess it up like a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. Out of the blue one day, he just said he didn't want to be together. I'm like, wow, okay, a little blindsided, but sure. So I start going about my normal life again and hanging out with friends. The normal post-relationship stuff. After about a month, he begs, like absolutely begs, to get back together. Movie-type stuff. Sending flowers to me at work. Sending handwritten cards almost daily across thousands of miles. And even buying me a ticket to fly out to see him. So I'm like, okay, whatever. I'll go and see what he has to say. Worst case scenario, I just fly home. So I got a ticket for 2 days. And because I just figured I could head out if he was being a dick. He picks me up from the airport and is basically how he used to be. He was just telling me he missed me and regretted it as soon as it had happened. And it was the biggest misjudge and mistake of his life as usual. So we stay with his family because he's like, oh, please don't get a hotel. I already feel bad enough about the whole month, just stay with us. And I just thought, hey, free room, I guess. Everything is completely fine for the first time in a few days. And then I get this alert on my phone. And it's a hurricane warning and saying they're pushing my flight for 4 hours or 4 days later. I'm like, crap, I need to get back to work. It only took like 3 days. When he gets back to the house from work, I tell him about it, and he's like, oh, I know, we already started boarding up windows. I was a little freaked out, but not too much, because I guess that's normal for big hurricanes. So the next morning, he shakes me, wakes me up, and tells me to come to the living room. I was like, okay. When I do, it's him, his two brothers, his sister, his mom, and his dad. People I have only met on the one occasion, and he has a boyfriend. They sit me down, and each of them reads a passage from the binder explaining why star women we shouldn't be together, and add why I need to move on. And he breaks up with me in his parents' house, in front of his siblings, in the middle of a hurricane power outage. Then, because of the hurricane, I was stuck there for 3 or 4 more days with this freak. Probably not the most psychopath person I've met, but this story is still so strange to me that I had to post it. At a party once, I met a friend of a friend who worked as a nurse at a local hospital. She was of the sort who would sigh heavily and use the unique stresses of her job to bring her the attention she was looking for. She took the spotlight with pleasure and started talking about how hard her job was. When I asked her if there was things she liked about her job, she became and beamed and explained that she worked primarily in maternity. However, her anecdotes had nothing to do with mother of the infant. She spoke primarily of how wonderful it was to be in charge of these women's lives. She explained how fragile they were in those moments and how even after delivery, she was the only one on the floor for hours who would be able to forecast if there were going to be any life-changing complications. She absolutely glowed as she explained how these things work in each other's lives. The conversation steered in other directions amongst partygoers, but she reclaimed it on the topic of high school experience. She started an anecdote about how she was rejected for an individual in an advanced choir position and blamed it solely on the poor judgment of the instructor. Years later, she got kicked in the face and she got to sing at the instructor's funeral. I'll never forget the pride she took in having me and give control of other people's lives. It struck me as the most basic display of evil. My ex-fiance told me that if I were to get pregnant with a girl before a boy, he would push me down the stairs and make me miscarry so we could have a boy first, as many times as it took. We broke up, and afterwards he convinced me to talk things over with him. I got into his car, and he proceeded to calmly explain to me that it didn't matter if I took him back or not, as he headed to the expressway. I asked him, "Where were we going?" And he remained absolutely silent. He started gaining speed, but the pitch in his voice never changed when he finally spoke again and began a diatribe about our love and how we would be together forever, no matter how many people wanted to pull us apart, and where no one would know how to find us. With a very creepy smile, one that lives in my mind to this day but can't recreate, all very calm. I had to call my mother, and she still had to talk him down, read bag, to bring back home. Added bonus, when I was back home and refused to see him, he stood outside my family window home through all hours of the night and started singing all these songs to me over the phone about how he was going to burn my house down and kill everyone inside if I didn't go outside and talk with him. My ex's dad told a story of the time he put a wet towel on top of an anthill and he threw the towel at my ex. The wet towel stuck to her skin and she was immediately covered with ants who bit her all over her body. She was laughing when he told the story like it was the funniest prank. My ex told him that it actually hurt a lot and that it traumatized her quite a bit, and he just said, "Well, I'm okay because I already asked God for forgiveness." I turned down a guy while walking back to my car with groceries in hand, and when I got to my car, he pulled up next to mine and kept asking for a hug. I was like, no in my head, but I told him I had a boyfriend. He laughed, and I got into my car and kept out to make sure his car wasn't following mine. His van was blacked out too. Not trying to stereotype who, but just making it creepier. I mean, an all blacked out van? She came late to our date, immediately ordered a drink and a burger, then told me she was late because of a family thing. Before the burger arrived, she mentioned she'd have to cut our date short because she was having a family dinner. I was like, okay, all good. Then she told me that the craziest thing had happened. Her sister met a dude on Tinder, and they ended up going to a family barbecue, which ended up with them getting married. Before her burger even arrived, she said, "Won't it be funny to pull a prank on my family? Like you and me went to my family barbecue and let everyone assume we were really hitting it off, and they'd totally think we were going to get married?" I'll admit, I'm also the psychopath in this story because I went. Good mashed potatoes. She spent all night introducing me as her future fiance, and I had to take a Tinder break after that. My friend's fiance went on a rant about how Charles Manson didn't deserve to be in jail because he didn't kill anyone. He just went off with no precursor to the conversation. He started it himself. I tried to ignore him, and he kept coming at me and trying to convince me that he was right and I knew it, but I just wanted to be politically correct. My friend has since passed away, and I steer all the way clear of that guy. I used to work in a financial office in downtown San Francisco. There was a woman who worked there who sometimes ate lunch at the same time as I did, and we'd chat about stuff. We had some overlapping tastes in books and movies, so we'd talk. One day, she started this really serious discussion about how she thought that all homeless people should be taken somewhere and shot because they were negative to society and would never be wanted or useful. I thought she was trying to be hyperbolic in some kind of jokey way for a few minutes, though that kind of shocked behavior wasn't really like her. After a few minutes of this, I figured out, no, that's just what she believes, and how she's comfortable enough around me to let that show. We argued about it for a while, because that's a shitty, insane take, and then lunch was over. We never sat together and talked again. I made sure of that.